Welcome back to Neural Battlefields, where we explore the most transformative and often devastating moments in human history. I'm your host, and today we're diving into one of the darkest chapters of the 20th century, a decade that rewrote the rules of human cruelty and transformed an entire generation of children into instruments of terror. This is the story of the Cultural Revolution. Before we begin, I want you to imagine something. Imagine waking up one morning to find your 15-year-old neighbor standing at your door, wearing a red armband accompanied by a group of teenagers. They're not there to play. They're there to judge you, to accuse you, to destroy everything you own, and possibly to destroy you. Now imagine that this isn't fiction. This happened to millions of people, and it was sanctioned by the state. If you find value in understanding how societies can descend into madness, how ideology can poison minds, and how we can learn from history's darkest moments, consider subscribing to Neural Battlefields. Hit that notification bell because we're going to explore the mechanisms of power, control, and human psychology that changed the world forever. It's 1966. China is already a nation transformed. 17 years have passed since the communist revolution that brought Mao Zedong to power. The country has endured massive upheaval, including the catastrophic Great Leap Forward, a campaign of rapid industrialization and collectivization that led to the deaths of an estimated 15 to 55 million people through famine, execution, and forced labor between 1958 and 1962. Mao's position is weakening. Pragmatists within the Communist Party, led by figures like Liu Shaoqi and Deng Xiaoping, are implementing reforms that contradict Mao's radical vision. They're introducing elements of market economy. They're pulling back from the most extreme collectivization policies. And most importantly, they're quietly reducing Mao's direct control over day-to-day governance. For Mao, this is unacceptable. He isn't just a leader. He sees himself as a revolutionary prophet, the architect of a new world order. The thought of being sidelined, of becoming a ceremonial figure while others run China, fills him with rage. So Mao does what threatened autocrats throughout history have done. He launches a counterattack. But this won't be a conventional political struggle. This will be something unprecedented. Something that will harness the most powerful and dangerous force in any society, the passion and fury of youth. On May 16, 1966, the Central Committee of the Communist Party issues a directive that will change everything. It declares that bourgeois representatives have infiltrated the party, the government, the army, and cultural circles. It calls for their elimination. But here's the genius and the horror of Mao's strategy. He doesn't rely on the established party machinery to carry out this purge. Instead, he appeals directly to young people, particularly students. He positions them as the pure revolutionary vanguard, uncorrupted by the old ways, untainted by traditional thinking. He tells them that it's their sacred duty to challenge authority, to question their teachers, to even turn against their parents if necessary. He's not just starting a political movement. He's weaponizing childhood itself. Think about the psychology here. Teenagers and young adults are at a developmental stage where they're naturally questioning authority, seeking identity, wanting to belong to something larger than themselves. Mao taps into this with devastating precision. He creates the Red Guards, organizations of young people given official sanction to rebel. Imagine being 14 or 15 years old and suddenly being told that you, not your parents, not your teachers, not the established authorities, but you are the true keepers of revolutionary purity. You're given power to judge anyone, including those who previously held power over you. It's intoxicating, it's addictive, and it's absolutely catastrophic. The first Red Guard units form in Beijing's elite high schools in May and June of 1966. These are children of party officials, educated youth who have been steeped in revolutionary ideology their entire lives. But the movement quickly spreads beyond Beijing, beyond elite schools, consuming the entire nation. By August 1966, millions of young people have joined Red Guard organizations. They wear red armbands. They carry copies of Mao's Little Red Book, waving it like a talisman, a shield against any accusation, a weapon to attack others. They chant slogans, destroy the four olds, old ideas, old culture, old customs, and old habits. And they mean it literally. What happens next is a systematic campaign of cultural annihilation. Red Guards swarm through cities and villages, destroying anything they deem represents the old world. Ancient temples that have stood for thousands of years are demolished. Priceless artifacts are smashed in the streets. Libraries are ransacked, with books thrown into bonfires that burn for days. Art, music, literature, anything that connects to China's pre-revolutionary past is targeted for destruction. Estimates suggest that in Beijing alone, during just the first few months, Red Guards destroyed over 4,000 cultural sites and relics. Nationally, the number reaches into the hundreds of thousands. But it doesn't stop with objects. The Red Guards turn their attention to people. Anyone associated with the old order becomes a target. Intellectuals, teachers, doctors, artists, former business owners, anyone with education or connection to traditional culture is labeled a class enemy or counter-revolutionary. The accusations are often absurd. A person might be condemned for owning books, for having traveled abroad, for wearing glasses, which somehow indicated bourgeois intellectualism, for having family members who owned land before the revolution, or simply because a rival Red Guard faction wanted to demonstrate their revolutionary purity by attacking them. The methodology of persecution is chillingly systematic. It begins with public denunciation rallies called struggle sessions. The accused are forced to stand on platforms, often wearing dunce caps or signs detailing their alleged crimes hanging around their necks. They're bent over in the airplane position, arms extended backward, forced to maintain this painful stance for hours. Red Guards and crowds scream accusations at them, demanding confessions. The psychological torture is relentless. But physical torture accompanies it. Victims are beaten with belts, sticks, and fists. Some are whipped. Some have their heads shaved in humiliating patterns. Some are branded. Here's what makes this particularly horrifying. These aren't soldiers or police carrying out orders. These are teenagers, children. Some as young as 12 or 13 years old are participating in beatings. They're encouraged to attack their own teachers, people who taught them to read and write. They turn on their neighbors, and in some documented cases, they attack their own parents. The ideology has become more important than humanity itself, more sacred than family bonds, more powerful than basic moral intuition. Let me give you a specific example that illustrates the madness. In August 1966, at a girls' school in Beijing, the vice principal, a woman named Bian Zhongyun, is accused of being a counter-revolutionary. She's beaten by students, some of whom she had taught and mentored. They use boards studded with nails, leather belts with heavy buckles, and wooden clubs. The beating lasts for hours. She dies from her injuries. She's one of the first teachers killed in Beijing, but she won't be the last. In Beijing alone, during August and September 1966, thousands of people are killed by Red Guards. The violence is so intense that the city's crematoriums cannot keep up with the bodies. The Red Guards don't work alone. Mao's wife, Jiang Qing, along with other radical party leaders known as the Gang of Four, actively encourage the violence. They provide ideological justification, they organize mass rallies, and they protect Red Guards from legal consequences. In August 1966, Mao himself reviews a massive gathering of Red Guards in Tiananmen Square. Over 1 million young people attend. Mao appears on the rostrum, and one young Red Guard named Song Binbin pins a Red Guard armband on his sleeve. He asks her name, which means gentle and polite. Mao suggests she change it to be martial, and she does, becoming Song Yeawu. The symbolism is clear. Gentleness is out, militancy is in. This moment electrifies the Red Guard movement nationwide. The violence takes on ritualistic characteristics that reveal the depth of ideological possession. Red Guards develop specific methods of humiliation and torture that become standardized across the country. The airplane position I mentioned earlier becomes so common that photographs of struggle sessions show dozens of victims simultaneously bent over in this agonizing stance. Houses are ransacked in what are called raids, where Red Guards confiscate anything deemed bourgeois: furniture, books, musical instruments, photographs, letters, artwork. Families watch helplessly as their possessions are carted away or destroyed in the street. Some people, anticipating raids, destroy their own belongings, burning family photos and ancestral records to avoid being caught with evidence of their feudal past. The targeting becomes increasingly arbitrary and absurd. In some areas, people are persecuted for having bad odors, meaning they don't smell like workers or peasants. Wearing glasses, as I mentioned, becomes dangerous because it suggests intellectualism. Having smooth hands rather than calloused ones can be evidence of not performing manual labor. Speaking foreign languages, even in academic contexts, is proof of worshiping foreign things. One documented case tells of a person persecuted because they owned a cat, which was deemed a bourgeois pet compared to dogs, which could be working animals. The logic becomes surreal, disconnected from reality, but within the ideological framework, it makes perfect sense. The persecution of intellectuals is particularly systematic and devastating. China had cultivated generations of scholars, scientists, writers, and artists who represented the peak of human achievement in their fields. These people suddenly find themselves labeled as the stinking old ninth category, ninth in a classification system of bad elements. Prominent scientists are forced to clean toilets. Renowned writers are sent to pig farms. Musicians have their hands broken so they can never play again. The message is clear. Knowledge is dangerous, education is suspicious, and the only safe position is ignorance combined with revolutionary fervor. But here's where the situation becomes even more complex and tragic. The Red Guards aren't a unified force. They splinter into competing factions, each claiming to be the true defenders of Mao's thought, each accusing others of being insufficiently revolutionary. These factions begin fighting each other. What starts as ideological debates escalates into armed combat. By 1967 and 1968, Red Guard factions are engaging in battles using weapons stolen from military arsenals. In some cities, the violence reaches the level of small-scale civil war. In the city of Guangzhou, for instance, different Red Guard factions battle for control, with casualties in the thousands. Schools across China essentially stop functioning. Universities are closed for years. An entire generation's education is interrupted or destroyed. These young people, who should be learning mathematics, literature, science, and arts, are instead learning to write denunciations, to identify class enemies, and to engage in political struggle. The long-term impact on China's intellectual and professional development is catastrophic. When universities finally reopen in the early 1970s, they select students based not on academic merit but on political background and revolutionary commitment. Quality of education has become a bourgeois concept, something to be destroyed rather than cherished. The persecution extends beyond cities into rural areas. Millions of urban youth are sent to the countryside for re-education through manual labor. This is presented as an opportunity to learn from peasants, to shed bourgeois thinking through physical work. In reality, it's often a form of exile. Young people who had grown up in cities, who had educational aspirations, are sent to remote villages to work in fields, often under harsh conditions, sometimes for years, sometimes forever. Their education is over. Their career prospects are destroyed, but they're told this is glorious, revolutionary work. The human cost is staggering and difficult to calculate precisely because the chaos itself prevents accurate record-keeping. Conservative estimates suggest that between 1 and 3 million people died as a direct result of the Cultural Revolution's violence. Some scholars put the number much higher, at 7 to 8 million or more. Beyond deaths, An estimated 100 million people were persecuted in some form. They were publicly humiliated, beaten, imprisoned, sent to labor camps, exiled to remote regions, or forced to confess to crimes they didn't commit. Families were destroyed. Children were encouraged to denounce their parents to prove their revolutionary commitment. Spouses betrayed each other. Friendships dissolved under the pressure to demonstrate ideological purity. Trust, the basic fabric that holds society together, was shredded. Cultural losses are incalculable. China's heritage, built over thousands of years, was systematically attacked. Ancient manuscripts were burned. Historical sites were vandalized beyond repair. Traditional practices were banned. Even language was affected, with certain words and expressions deemed feudal or bourgeois and therefore forbidden. The impact on Chinese culture persists to this day, with some traditional arts and practices lost forever, known only through scattered records that survived the purges. By 1968, the violence has spiraled so far out of control that even Mao recognizes the need to rein it in. The Red Guards have served their purpose. They've helped Mao destroy his political enemies within the party. Liu Shaoqi, once China's president and Mao's designated successor, has been purged, publicly humiliated, and will die in imprisonment in 1969. Deng Xiaoping has been sent to internal exile. Mao's rivals have been eliminated. But the Red Guards themselves have become a problem. Their factional fighting threatens basic governance. The military has to be deployed to restore order. Mao begins sending Red Guards to the countryside en masse, effectively disbanding the movement by dispersing its members. The Cultural Revolution officially continues until Mao's death in 1976, though its most violent phase ends by 1969. During these later years, the focus shifts to political campaigns and purges within party and military structures, but the grassroots mass violence of the early Red Guard period subsides. When Mao dies, the radical faction known as the Gang of Four is quickly arrested. China begins a long process of recovering from the decade of chaos. The immediate aftermath is a period of reckoning without full reconciliation. Deng Xiaoping, who had been purged during the Cultural Revolution, returns to power and implements policies that begin to undo some of the damage. Universities reopen with academic standards. Intellectuals are cautiously rehabilitated. The economy begins to reform, moving away from pure ideology toward pragmatism. But there's no truth commission, no comprehensive accounting of what happened and why. The official verdict is that the Cultural Revolution was a mistake, that it was the result of Mao being misled by bad elements, particularly the Gang of Four. This narrative preserves Mao's legacy while acknowledging disaster, but it prevents deeper examination of how ideology, personality cults, and political systems created the conditions for tragedy. Individual Red Guards face varied fates. Some rise to positions of power in the reformed China, their revolutionary credentials from the Cultural Revolution helping rather than hurting their careers, though the most violent actions are quietly forgotten. Others spend decades in psychological torment, haunted by memories of what they did. A few have publicly apologized. One former Red Guard wrote a public apology to her teacher decades later, acknowledging the beating she participated in and asking forgiveness. But these are exceptions. Most maintain silence, either from shame, denial, or because society hasn't created space for such conversations. So what are we to make of this? How do we understand how an entire generation of children became executioners? The answer lies in understanding several psychological and social mechanisms that the Cultural Revolution weaponized with devastating effect. First, there's the power of ideology to override moral intuition. When an ideology is presented as absolute truth, as the only lens through which reality can be understood, it becomes totalizing. Everything is filtered through it. Actions that would normally trigger moral revulsion, like beating a teacher or betraying a parent, become not just acceptable but praiseworthy when framed as revolutionary duty. The Red Guards genuinely believed they were making the world better. They thought they were eliminating evil and building paradise. This is the danger of ideological absolutism in any form. Second, there's the manipulation of youth psychology. Adolescence is a period of intense identity formation, of questioning inherited norms, of seeking belonging and purpose. The Cultural Revolution offered all of this. It gave young people a clear identity as revolutionary vanguards. It validated their natural questioning of authority by making it a virtue. It provided belonging through Red Guard organizations. And it gave them purpose, the grand mission of transforming society. Leaders who understand youth psychology can harness these developmental needs for their own purposes, as Mao demonstrated with terrible efficiency. Third, there's the mechanism of social proof and conformity. Once the violence began, it became self-reinforcing. If everyone around you is denouncing class enemies, if your friends are participating in struggle sessions, if joining in is praised and abstaining is suspicious, the pressure to conform becomes enormous. No one wants to be the next target. The safest way to prove you're not a counter-revolutionary is to be especially zealous in attacking others. This creates a vicious cycle where violence escalates as people compete to demonstrate their revolutionary purity. Fourth, there's the dissolution of alternative authority structures. The Cultural Revolution deliberately attacked all sources of authority except Mao himself. Teachers couldn't provide guidance because they were targets. Parents couldn't offer wisdom because they might be class enemies. Traditional moral frameworks were labeled feudal superstition. Religious practice had already been suppressed. What filled this vacuum? Only Mao's ideology and the peer pressure of Red Guard culture. When all other sources of moral guidance are eliminated, people, especially young people, become extremely vulnerable to manipulation. Fifth, and perhaps most crucially, there's the dehumanization of opponents. Once someone is labeled a class enemy or counter-revolutionary, they're no longer fully human in the ideological framework. They become symbols, representations of everything wrong with the old society. This dehumanization is essential for violence. It's difficult to beat someone you see as fully human, as someone's parent or teacher or neighbor. But if they're redefined as obstacles to paradise, as enemies of the people, as threats to everything good, then violence against them becomes not just easier but morally necessary. The lessons of the Cultural Revolution extend far beyond China or the specific context of communist ideology. They're lessons about human nature, about the fragility of civilization, about how quickly social order can collapse when certain safeguards are removed. We see echoes of these mechanisms in various movements throughout history and in contemporary politics. Anytime we see movements that claim monopoly on truth, that position one group as pure and others as corrupt, that encourage the young to reject the wisdom of experience, that demand absolute loyalty and punish dissent, that dehumanize opponents, we should recognize the warning signs. The survivors of the Cultural Revolution carry its scars. Many former Red Guards have spent decades grappling with guilt over their actions. Some have apologized to their victims. Others remain in denial, unable to face what they did. The victims and their families live with trauma that passes down through generations. China itself still struggles with how to remember and discuss this period. Official accounts acknowledge it was a disaster, 10 years of chaos, but detailed examination of causes, mechanisms, and individual responsibility remains limited. There are no memorials to the victims. No truth and reconciliation process has occurred. The wounds remain largely unhealed because they've never been fully examined. For those of us watching from outside, from different times and places, the Cultural Revolution offers a profound warning. It shows us that civilization is thinner than we think. That ordinary people, including children, can commit extraordinary cruelty when the right psychological and social conditions are created. That ideology, when it becomes absolute, is one of history's most dangerous forces. And that the price of freedom, of reason, of moral clarity, is eternal vigilance against those who would manipulate our natures for their own power. As we close this exploration of one of history's darkest chapters, I want you to think about what you've learned today. Think about the mechanisms that turn children into executioners. Think about the warning signs of ideological extremism. Think about the importance of maintaining multiple sources of moral authority, of protecting education from political manipulation, of resisting dehumanization of opponents no matter how much we disagree with them. These aren't just historical lessons, they're guides for navigating our own time. If this documentary has given you new insights into how societies can go wrong and what we can learn from history's tragedies, I encourage you to like this video. Share it with someone who would benefit from understanding these dynamics. The algorithm favors videos that get engagement, and your like and share help us reach more people who want to understand the world's most important lessons. Subscribe to Neural Battlefields for more deep dives into the moments that shaped our world, often in ways we're still discovering. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration of power, ideology, and the human condition. Remember, we study history's battles not to glorify them but to understand them, to learn from them, and to ensure we never repeat them. The battlefield isn't just a physical space. It's in our minds, our ideas, our choice between truth and ideology, between humanity and zealotry. That's why this is Neural Battlefields. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and never stop questioning.